You have to be involved. I think we live in a time when if you are not at the table, you're on the menu, right? That's the kind of phrase that gets tossed around. But if you are not sharing your voice and your perspective, you're letting someone else do the talking for you, and they might not share the information that you need shared in the way that you want it shared.
Hello, I'm Neil Zipser, and welcome to Knox Friends. Today, we're trying something new with our podcast. For the past couple of years, our podcast has been audio only. This will be our first of hopefully many more podcasts with video, so wish us all luck today. Our guest today is Michaela Campbell, and I want to thank her for being our first guest with this video edition. Michaela was in the news recently after Bill Webb announced his retirement as Executive Director of the Congressional Fire Services Institute, or as we know it, CFSI. Michaela was quickly named to replace Bill to lead CFSI effective January 1st, 2026, a move that received full support from the fire service industry. Michaela served as the Director of Government Affairs for CFSI since October 2019. She has led the organization's federal advocacy on behalf of the nation's fire and emergency services. In this role, she worked closely with members of Congress, national fire service organizations, and the Congressional Fire Services Caucus to promote policies and secure funding that support first responders across the country. Before joining CFSI, Michaela worked at a law firm as a legislative assistant, and prior to that, she served in the U.S. Senate in the office of Senator Susan Collins. There, she developed a strong understanding of federal firefighter programs, including the Assistance to Firefighters Grant, or AFG, and staffing for adequate fire and emergency response programs, or SAFER, while also handling a wide range of policy areas such as tax and retirement, security, national defense, and homeland security. Thank you, Michaela, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Again. Well, first of all, congratulations on your new appointment. You certainly have some big shoes to fill there.
Yes. Yes, I do. It was incredible. I mean, Bill's been doing this for 30 years, which was incredible to me, and I've been very grateful. I just passed my 6-year mark at CFSI, so I've been able to learn from him for the last 6 years, and very excited to kind of build on the platform that he's been making for the last 30 years, which is incredible.
Yeah, and before we get into your plans and what you hope to accomplish and all that, I'm pretty sure everyone listening has heard of CFSI or knows about CFSI, but there may be a few people out there who may not know about CFSI. So can you provide a brief summary of the role and mission of CFSI?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So CFSI, we're the Congressional Fire Services Institute. We have congressional in the name, but we're actually not congressionally affiliated. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization, and our primary mission is to serve as a bridge between the fire and emergency services, the federal government, and the general public. So a lot of our work is on improving public safety, strengthening the fire and emergency services, and making sure that people have the resources that they need. Um, Doing some advocacy, some policy analysis, education, anything we can do to help kind of make sure that everyone is aware of the needs and challenges of the fire and emergency services. So we work with our National Advisory Committee, which has almost 40 of the major national organizations that most folks have heard of. So you've got the IAFF, the NVFC, the volunteers, the chiefs, some of the code groups, NFPA, ICC, UL, and then fire marshals, fire service training instructors, et cetera, all the way to basically anyone you can think of. And we're very lucky to get to work with them on consensus policy resolutions. And then once we've reached consensus on issues that are deemed of importance, then we work on them together collectively as a NAC through CFSI. So that would be things like support for AFG and SAFER, for the U.S. Fire Administration, for carbon monoxide safety, and a whole host of other issues. But yeah, it's a great organization. It's a cool job, and I was really excited when they had the opening, and I got brought on board a little over, I guess, over half a decade ago, which is terrifying.
Yeah, and we'll talk about CFSI's Super Bowl, the big
Yeah.
symposium and dinner in a little bit here. It's one of those things every year that is on my calendar and won't come off. So even if it means upsetting my wife or something like that with plans, I have to go to the CFSI symposium and dinner.
Well, I hear
So
a nice dinner is great, and we have one of those, so
yeah, maybe I'll have to bring her along sometime.
bring them along.
When you worked in Senator Collins' office, was that your first exposure to the fire service?
In a way, so actually one of my uncles was a firefighter, so growing up, obviously knew that that was his job, and there's, pictures of me with his hat and whatnot when I was a little kid, but I was young and I don't know how much attention kids pay to the jobs of the adults around them. So working in Senator Collins' office was definitely my first exposure to like fire service policy, especially on the national level. And, I always respected the profession, but that was my first opportunity to really interact with it in a professional capacity.
And now, as they say, the fire industry, is it in your blood?
I hope so. I don't know that I can claim that for myself. I kind of feel like you have to have that bestowed on you, but I mean, I love the community. I love the work that we get to do, and I hope people can feel that the passion that we have for moving forward on the challenge, overcoming some of the challenges, and yeah, kind of keep the drumbeat of progress moving forward.
Hmm. So before we talk about some of the hot topics in the industry and CFSI priorities, I have to ask you what many of us are wondering, and that is, how in the world do you keep your sanity working in Washington, D.C.?
Chocolate. No. No, I'm just kidding. I think being in DC, you get a really interesting perspective, and I always love talking to, family and friends that don't live in the DC area, the DMV, sometimes they call it, right? Because it's really interesting how the news travels and reporting travels and what people are taking away when you're not necessarily living it every day. But I think it's an interesting time. It's a challenging time. It kind of always is, and you always have new challenges. But there's this saying that if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. And that is really, I think, at the soul of CFSI, and that's what makes it easy to keep getting up every day and going to work, right? Because I get to work with these phenomenal people on these issues that I think are so important and that we all care about. And if you have to go to work and ask people for a lot of money down at the, the Capitol building, it's nice to be able to know that you're doing it for the right thing and the right reasons. And that's how I try to get up every day and stay positive, is just knowing that, hopefully the work that we're doing together is making a difference. And we've had a lot of successes, and you got to hang on to those. And the times when you're not successful, you always have the opportunity to work with, your collective group to figure out how can we do better next time? How can we make changes next time? So I think you got to focus on the opportunity for collaboration, and the opportunity to share your voice is always there, and you have to recognize that that's a power and hang on to that.
It's a great answer. And we'll stay on this Washington, D.C. theme. What are the top legislative priorities for the fire service heading into 2026 in D.C.?
That's a great question. I would say it's a little bit in flux depending on kind of how 25 shakes out, which we're obviously, as of the time of this filming, still in a government shutdown, and it's really going for seems to be headed for a record, which is not ideal. But I would say one of the bills that we've been working on through CFSI and also with our partner organizations, and they've done a great job kind of leading on this, is the Honoring Our Fallen Heroes Act. So it was included in the Senate NDAA, and the standalone bill number is S237 and HR 1269. But like I said, it was included in the Senate version of the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, which is like a big policy bill that ideally moves every year. So we're trying to keep that in, and I'm not totally sure what the timing is for finalizing that. A lot of it is dependent on the shutdown, but that's one of the active legislative items. So hopefully we can finish that up this year, or whenever the NDAA for this year kind of wraps up. But if that happens to drag into next year, we'll be focusing on that. We would love to see that move. Appropriations is always an issue. I know we talked about AFG Safer, we talked about U.S. Fire Administration, USFA. So every year the appropriations process runs, and theoretically it starts kind of in the early, like late winter, early spring, so February, March, and runs through, so the fiscal year ends in September, and then hopefully Congress has made some decisions, or if not, you end up kind of where we are right now, waiting for them to make some choices. But that'll come around, and we try to protect the funding for the fire service that we have at the federal level, and explain why the fire service needs that federal support in order to be able to do the work that they do every day. And then there's kind of the more ad hoc stuff. So, but there could be another reconciliation bill. Do they focus that on tax? Do they focus it on health? I've heard talk about surface transportation. So I would say honoring our fallen heroes is definitely we're working on. Appropriations we'll always be working on. And then there's always something that comes up that you could try to plan for, but you mostly have to just try to be flexible. And once the topic starts to get set, you figure out which of your priorities kind of match up with that and how we can move from there.
And I'm sure today's partisan environment makes life difficult for lobbyists and legislative consultants. How hard is it to get anything done today? And have you had to adapt your strategy in any way, or is the fire service immune from partisan issues?
Six of one, half dozen of the other. So the environment is challenging. It's always challenging, and I think right now it's challenging in new and very specific ways. The way that you need to explain your issues, I think you have to adapt depending on who you're talking to, which you would do anyway. But the benefit for us is that in the fire and emergency services, fire is not partisan, and the all hazards issues are not partisan. They are a reality that we all have to address and work on, and a lot of the members of Congress really understand that. So there's not really a partisan issue for us in terms of like the merits of the issues. We don't have to push too hard on that, but I think there can be an idea sometimes that you just get grandfathered in and you don't have to go fight for your money or funding or support. And I think if that was ever true, it's certainly not true now. So this idea that Congress will just recognize the fire service and give us whatever we want is not realistic. And you have to be building those relationships at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level with your representatives, because we're not in a time when someone just gets precedence. You have to go and you have to make the case. And I think sometimes that makes people a little nervous because they're like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. Lobbying, a lot of it's just education. They need to understand what you do and that it's not just fire. We talk to folks because the Hill portfolios are so big that they don't necessarily have the time to understand every little thing. And that's where you come in as a subject matter expert. So I think it's a complicated environment, but the way that we overcome that is by building relationships and working together. And, we do that pretty well now. I think, we can always do better, and we can always encourage our friends and the people that we're meeting and our colleagues to say, hey, do you feel like you have all the relationships that you need or want, and are they at the levels that you like, or can we all kind of step our game up? But that, I think, is and when you have those relationships, you can be really flexible in strategy because you know people and you can get the information you need to make those decisions. So I think
Yeah.
it's challenging, but when you work together and when you build those coalitions, you can make a really strong case.
Yeah, and I'm going to date myself here. Before I was in the fire industry, I was in the automotive industry, and we went to DC with some automotive supplier executives to fight steel tariffs of all things. This was about 20 years ago. And we went there thinking we had a good case, and the steel union showed up. They heard we were coming with literally hundreds, maybe thousands of steel union workers, and people do make a difference. I'm going to keep pushing you on this topic a little bit, but
Yeah.
many people try to stay as far away from politics as they can. And I know a lot of fire chiefs, all their whole job is politics, right? But it's really critical to be involved. So what suggestions do you have for someone who wants to get involved but isn't sure how? And really, how important is it to get to know those local representatives?
You have to be involved. I think we live in a time when if you are not at the table, you're on the menu, right? That's the kind of phrase that gets tossed around. But if you are not sharing your voice and your perspective, you're letting someone else do the talking for you, and they might not share the information that you need shared in the way that you want it shared. And I think that it can be complicated. And, I talk to people all the time who are maybe concerned about doing that relationship building because they don't want to be embarrassed, or they're not totally sure what to say. And at the national level for CFSI, part of what we want to do is to be that infrastructure for you. So we have downloadable one-pagers that have talking points. We have instructions on how to reach out to your members of Congress, which is applicable at any level. You can use it at the federal level. You can use those scripts as well at the state and local level and tweak them however you think is most appropriate. But we try to provide that information to make it as easy as possible for the people in the states and the districts to build those relationships, because there is a role for the national level organizations in reaching out to Congress, congressional offices, agencies, et cetera. But also, these people want to hear from their voters, from the electorate, from the people who live in their communities and support them, or not support them, as the case may be, but live in the communities that they represent. So I think that is, and one example that I'll give is the National Fire Academy, which I think many people are familiar with, but just in case, the National Fire Academy, or NFA, is a training academy run by the U.S. Fire Administration. The in-person campus is in Emmitsburg, Maryland, and it also partners with the state training academies to deliver training in the states and virtual training. And it was shut down in March, which is, every time a new administration comes in, there can be certain types of review of different programs, et cetera, but typically it doesn't come with shutting down the program. So that was kind of something that that was very unfamiliar, that hadn't really been done before. And there was no sense necessarily that it was going to come back. So that happened on a Friday. It was shut down. And by Monday, the CFSI National Advisory Committee met, and we had our action page up, our talking points, requesting that people reach out to their members of Congress. And this is where I think, this is how your individual voice on the ground really makes a difference. So the national groups, what our role is and what we try to do is make sure that we are reaching out to all the people that we know and those that we don't. We're sending the letters from the national organization perspective. We are having meetings from the national organization perspective. We're sending out information. But when that is also echoed by what's called grassroots, which is the outreach from people living in the states and districts, that is incredibly helpful. And that can look like if you get a voter voice, or if someone's like, hey, forward this message or something, and you do that, that is helpful, because the offices keep track of, the chatter and the outreach that they're getting on different issues. And sometimes it can encourage them either to reach back out to you directly as the individual, or they're like, hey, I think I heard about that from a national organization, and they'll come check back in with us. And then that helps us to direct them by saying, hey, some members are signing on to this letter. We would love for you to join to, get as much support as possible. Some members are making phone calls to FEMA, whoever, and it helps us to provide that information. But it's kind of like, people look at it different ways, but in this sense, it's kind of like a bicycle, right? So one wheel is the national organizations doing what we need to do and pulling all the levers that we have access to. And the other wheel is grassroots, and it's the folks on the ground, either who have those relationships, and the key is to make a friend before you need a friend, which is why you should always start today building those relationships. But even if you don't have them, that could be the impetus to reach out. And when you do that, that keeps that wheel spinning in concert with the national organization wheel, and then the bike can kind of ride straight ahead. So I think, it really matters having individual outreach, and, you have to do it no matter what level you're at. And if there's ever anything that CFSI or the other national organizations can do to make that easier and to help bridge that gap, that's what we want to do, and we're happy to do it. But, it's so important to participate, and that individual level is really critical.
Yeah, that's a great point you made about having friends before you need them. So we could all use more friends in life, right? And speaking of friendly faces, I read somewhere that nurses and doctors are the most respected and trusted professions out there. And then number 3 were firefighters. People just trust firefighters and respect the firefighting profession. Does that respect and trust of firefighters pay dividends at all in DC? In other words, are legislators more willing to help out the fire industry than maybe some other industries out there?
I had 2 immediate trains of thought. The first is that, in answer to your question, we just don't live in a time when anyone gets preference. Funding is tight. Congress is really, not wanting to spend a lot of money right now. So we're just not in an era when somebody is going to get money just because you should or you have historically. You really do have to show up and fight for your money and your support and your funding every year, every time. But I think the flip side of that is that the fire service is a trusted organization, but I think what that helps with is the relationship building piece. Because I think that sometimes people are nervous. Well, are they going to listen to me? Yes, coming from the fire service, you are the one who knows what you do every day, and you are the one who can tell your story. And it also doesn't hurt if you show up in your dress uniform to really seal the whole deal. But you have inherent value because of who you are and what you do. And the fire service, the fact that it's for the fire service, I think does help, because who doesn't want to meet the fire service? But I don't think that directly translates into just being handed money. You still have to do that second step, which is you have an incredible basis for a relationship, and then you build that relationship, and then that's what leads to them understanding the needs and challenges of the fire service, and that is what leads to the support and the funding and the programs that we need from the federal level. So it's kind of a two-part answer, I think.
Yeah, and we've been talking about the federal level, but obviously there's the local level and state level. Does CFSI get involved at all with those levels of government?
To a certain extent. So, what we say at CFSI is that we are federal and we are national. And sometimes people conflate the two and put them together, but because a lot of the work that we do is federal, but it's also national. So, for example, codes and standards are adopted, in states and localities, and that is the way that it is structured and, should be or is right now. So we are not necessarily coming to, your town in, whatever state saying your locality needs to adopt this code and standard, but we do try to put out information in a broader sense on why we have codes and standards, why we need codes and standards, and we try to amplify the messaging from some of our National Advisory Committee members and partners. So, for example, NFPA, ICC, UL, they've been doing a lot of messaging on how those processes work and how people can get involved and why they're important and how they interact with local, state, and federal laws. So I think, a lot of the advocacy we do tends to be federal because that's where we're registered, right? But the information and the trends that we track are national, and that ends up kind of pushing down to the state and local levels as well.
And I know after hearing this podcast and watching it, a lot of fire chiefs and people in the fire service are going to be all jacked up, ready to go create some friends in DC and their local governments. And I know CFSI has some helpful tips that can help them do that. But what are some mistakes that you've seen that some people might make that might work against them when it comes to advocacy? What are some of the don'ts?
I think, well, let me start this answer with the do's, which is anyone can build these relationships. You can build these relationships. Please do it today. A couple of things to keep in mind, and I mentioned this before, but you are the expert on your own story. You don't have to be somebody that you're not, and you don't have to tell a story that you don't have. Just take the work that you do and the stories that you have, and then use that to support whatever you're going in to talk about. I think it can help. I mentioned the one-pagers that we have on our website. Part of the reason that we ask people, if you're going to advocate on a federal level, to take those with you, or at least to take a look at them, is because those are the consensus issues that all of CFSI's National Advisory Committee support. So if you work off of those one-pagers, you will be supporting initiatives that are supported by basically all of the fire service organizations. So it helps to align the messaging and have, that one voice and keep people on the same page. And advocacy is always more effective when everyone's on the same page and using similar messaging. So if you can look at that messaging and try to work that into your, spiel and use your stories to support that, that just helps keep us all on the same page. And it helps make sure that, when you're talking to an office, they're more likely to be like, oh, someone else came to me about that as well. And it just makes it easier for them to understand what you're asking. But, in general, I think you want to just show up, tell your story, have your plan in place, what you're going to talk about, think about it in advance, practice your comments. I mean, that's one of the things that I think people can always do more of. It can feel really silly to practice in advance, but federal meetings, especially, and to a certain extent, state and local, when you're responsible for making an ask, you have to basically tee up your own meeting, which can feel really uncomfortable because you have to be really abrupt and you have to say, like, I'm here today to talk about X. Here are my reasons, for X, and I want to ask you to do this. So I guess to sum that up, show up, tell your story. Don't forget to make the ask. You do actually have to ask them for something unless you're not there for that. But if you're there to ask for something, actually say it. Because if you leave without making an ask, they're like, what an easy meeting. I don't have to do anything. But otherwise, just know that you're fully capable of doing this, and we want you to do it. We need you to do it, and we're happy to answer questions. The bar is not as high as people think it is.
Yeah, and speaking of the ask, it's probably a bad time to be asking for money from the government. I'm not sure there ever is a good time to ask for money from the government, but a lot of fire and EMS departments, even law enforcement agencies, rely on grant dollars for equipment, staffing, community programs, and other initiatives. And there continues to be changes within FEMA. We obviously have the shutdown right now, but as far as we've heard, grants aren't going away anytime soon. Do you agree with that?
So that's a complicated question. So the grants, AFG and SAFER specifically, have been reauthorized. They were reauthorized in the last Congress, and they typically get funded through appropriations every year. But so, as it were, Congress has spoken on those programs and indicated that they support them. But I think we have clearly been seeing reductions in agency personnel that makes it very difficult for them to continue to implement programs with maybe the level of service that people have experienced before. I know the AFG and SAFER grants this year went out like 3 days before the award deadline, or 3 days before the funding deadline, when that money would have gone back to the Treasury Fund, presumably. And people had a month to accept their awards, and then that happened to be in the middle of a shutdown. So actually, fun fact, if you got an award and you had not already accepted it because FEMA Go is shut down, FEMA did put out some information on extending the deadline so that people can actually accept the awards. But that is something that we haven't necessarily seen in prior years. So the bottom line is that we have the programs, and we have worked really hard to make them as safe as they can be in this day and age, but it doesn't remove the constant need to be building relationships and educating on why what we have is important. You cannot just assume, well, I have it, that box is checked, it's going to be there constantly, and I don't have to think about it again until the reauthorization is pending or something. You have to kind of treat it like you got to play your zone defense. Now you have it, but you can't lose it. So you have to be constantly playing defense on what you have, even while you're working on things that you might need or want. So, that's a really great question. And I think the bottom line is just nothing is ever certain, So you always have to be educating and making friends. No one ever has enough friends.
So one of the questions I usually ask our guests is if they have any mentors or leaders who've been important to them in their development. Do you have anyone that has made a significant difference in your career?
That's a great question. I think what's coming to mind for me is that I have been so lucky in my career to work with a lot of people. And even the way that our National Advisory Committee is structured, we have 38 organizations on the NAC, and they all send representatives to the meetings. So getting to work with those people is amazing because the expertise and the professionalism and the experience in the room is incredible. So in some ways, I'm like spoiled for mentors and people who have who I can learn from. But I will single one out. He's going to hate it, and that is too bad. But getting to learn from Bill Webb has been amazing. He is so knowledgeable about politics and policy and the fire service and CFSI, and just getting to learn how he thinks and how he sees the issues has been really invaluable to me. And so I think, I'm excited for him to retire. He's got a lot of stuff that he's really excited about in retirement, but I will never take for granted what I learned from him. And he's an incredible individual, and his legacy and the work that he's done has been amazing. So to be able to witness that and maybe even be a small part of it as one of his, supporting staff members has been incredible. So thank you, Bill.
Yes, thanks, Bill, from the industry. We've talked a lot about your role at CFSI and what you do in DC, but tell us a couple things about Michaela Campbell that some people or many people may not know.
Oh, the fun fact. I should have workshopped this beforehand. Well, I guess one thing that kind of comes to mind, because I had a family situation recently. I actually have a very large family. I have almost 20 first cousins, and most of them are married with kids. So our family reunions get out of control very quickly. But I was kind of raised with that big family attitude, and I think working for the fire service has really that family friendly and kind of family first ethos has been kind of familiar to me and something that I really value. And I think it really helps every day to kind of get up and go to work when you're working for a great community, and one that has such an incredible history and also does such awesome stuff every day. So I think I try to take that piece maybe of my personal life and apply it to my work life, and kind of helps to keep things moving forward. And I like having a mission-driven job. So, being able to work for CFSI and work in the fire and emergency services is something that I don't take for granted.
Cool. So we'll wrap it up with talking about a little bit about the symposium and dinner, or as some of us call it, the firefighter prom. But remind everybody about the dates for the 2026 symposium dinner and why they should attend.
For the fire prom, great question. Appreciate it. So the first thing I will say is that the CFSI Symposium and Dinner, the National Fire and Emergency Services Symposium Dinner, it's a conference. So sometimes people talk about it in shorthand as the dinner. There is a dinner that kind of caps off the event, and it's where we do a lot of our national award presentations and recognition. And, Neil, I think you can attest, being in that ballroom with 1,500 fire service members, it's kind of an amazing feeling. And it's so cool to be surrounded by that experience, and all of our national advisory committees represented. So you've got 38 of the major organizations there and their leadership. So it's a really great opportunity to kind of interact with the who's who of a variety of different fire service organizations. And you also get that DC experience. We have a Hill component where we ask people to go up on Capitol Hill, and I mentioned some of the one-pagers. We have specific ones that we put up for the event that are relevant during that time of year. But it is March 18th and 19th, 2026. We are at the Marriott Marquis Hotel in Washington, D.C. Actually, was just there this morning. It's a beautiful property. All the information and tickets are available at www.cfsi.org. You'll see our symposium and dinner tab, or you can check out our socials. We are on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook primarily. But when you come to the conference, the symposium and dinner, you have the symposium piece, which is all of our seminars. You have the dinner, which is the recognition. You have the Hill Day and the access to Capitol Hill. And then there's a lot of networking receptions, et cetera. So it's a fun time, and we're pretty deep in the throes of planning for 2026. So really excited to see everyone. And if you have any questions, send us an email at update@cfsi.org. But we hope to see everyone there. It's a great event, and it's a real opportunity for you to have an impact directly that day. So.
And if you get there a day early, you could celebrate St. Patrick's Day in Washington, D.C. So why wouldn't you do it?
What could be better? Exactly.
All right. Well, Michaela, I know how busy you are and how busy you're about to be, and I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us today and being our first guest on our video installment of Knox and Friends. So good luck in your new role.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, and thanks for letting me experience the new video segment.
Great. Thanks again.
Appreciate it.